Word Balloon is brought to you by the League of Word Balloon Listeners. Hey everybody, welcome back. It's Word Balloon, the comic book conversation show. John Suntress here. Let me get the picture out of the way so I can see everybody, and also we can see our guest. It's David Pepose, everybody, a fine writer who's been entertaining us from Spencer and Locke and Going to the Chapel, and has a few new comics that are on the way, but also in progress as well. Good to see you, David. How you been?
Doing great. Thanks so much for having me, John. Yeah, it's been a crazy year. And I think everybody can attest to that, just with everything going on with the pandemic. And so I feel both fortunate and almost a little guilty that I've been able to sort of keep getting work out during all of this. But I'm very excited to chat with you because I have a few new books that are out and are coming soon. And I think people are going to find a lot to love about them.
That's excellent, man. We may as well start with the OZ. Yeah, because that's up and running.
Yeah. So, I last we spoke at Mainframe Comic-Con, we had just announced my Kickstarter, the OZ, which is What If the Hurt Locker Took Place in the Wizard of Oz? And it's the story of Dorothy Gale's granddaughter, who's a disillusioned Iraq war veteran. And she is swept up by a tornado and stranded in the war-torn land of Oz. And she's going to find out that her grandmother's killing of the Wicked Witch of the West caused Oz to fall into this kind of vicious power vacuum that has left them in a generation of warfare. So she's going to have to navigate these factions led by her grandmother's former friends in order to survive the occupied zone, or as the locals call it, the OZ.
I want to ask regarding Oz, and I mean, honestly, I love the real story behind the bomb stories, and a lot of the metaphors that he used for that stuff. So did you do your research and really kind of tell me about, because that's the great thing about Oz. There are all these different areas, and they absolutely represented society of that period where they were made, like literally 100 years ago, about 110 years ago.
I had written a term paper in college, actually, comparing Baum's ever-growing mythology to the Marvel Universe, because he was doing sort of this shared continuity decades before Stan and Jack ever came on the scene. And so I read a number of the Oz books in college, and they really kind of they kind of stood with me. The thing that I love about Wizard of Oz is it's very universal. Not just because of the Judy Garland film, which everybody knows and loves, but the sheer archetypes going back to Baum's original novels. Dorothy, the Tin Man, the Scarecrow, the Cowardly Lion, they each have very unique designs and character arcs and very specific needs and desires. And so it's sort of that cultural osmosis, kind of taking a little bit of the same page of a playbook from Spencer and Locke, which did a riff on Calvin and Hobbes. Everybody knows what the Wizard of Oz is. And so those archetypes are very strong, but they're very flexible. And so by taking sort of the land of Oz that we all know and love and seeing what happened next and sort of putting them through this wartime ringer, we're able to take some really fun twists and turns for the characters in a way that still feels really organic to the source material. We just sent out our digital rewards for the Kickstarter this week, and we're getting all of the physical copies of the books tomorrow morning. Actually, over 1,000 pounds of books are arriving in my driveway. But the initial reactions to the book so far have been universally positive. I've felt like this was a special book for a long time. It's the reason I took it to Kickstarter, is because I got tired of waiting for permission. But it's so nice to see that I believe in my creative team and I believe in this concept, but seeing people who have backed the project say, I'm a veteran and I think that you really spoke to my experience, or I have
Wow.
PTSD and this really spoke to my experience. Um, that's sort of the highest praise that I can ask for as a writer. Because, as somebody who I haven't served in the military, but I did interview a lot of military people coming home as a newspaper reporter and talking with them sort of about mental health and sort of how they have coped and adjusted coming back home. Especially this was, at the onset of the last recession I was a newspaper reporter.
Sure. 2008. Yeah, around there.
Yeah, 2008 and 9 and 10. And I just try to treat this book with compassion and empathy. And I think that kind of gets us through a lot of sort of the high wire act of this high concept. And it's a really special book. We're working on part 2 right now. We're going to do another Kickstarter in early 2021. But yeah, seeing the early reaction to this book it's been really vindicating.
That's great, man. Now, how long between the Kickstarter people getting their books and then trying to put it in the stores?
Sure. It's funny. It's I don't know.
Okay.
It's still
Or
very
is that
TBD.
part of the plan?
Yeah,
Go
it's
on.
very TBD. I mean, the thing that I have always said is, the Kickstarter people believed in us, and so I am
Yeah.
committed to seeing this series through on Kickstarter before anybody else can get to it. We have had partnerships with retailers. I make it a point to always offer a retailer discount tier, just because retailers are the reason that I have a career, and so I want
Sure.
to make sure that we give back to them. But it's funny, the way that the OZ kind of came into being, and this is kind of par for the course for all of my projects, is it's always an uphill fight to sort of get them over the plate. I had initially developed the OZ for a publisher on the heels of Spencer and Locke, the first volume. And without sort of naming any names or anything, we went head to head with another fantasy book that got pitched around the same time, and by a much more established writer. So I'm not like, I totally get why if they had to choose one or the other, they chose the other one. But what happened was the editor who had asked me to develop this, he did something that he didn't have to do, and it was very nice of him. And I actually emailed him to thank him for it. He said, "Don't give up on this book. This didn't go our way, but it's not for lack of skill or talent on your part. This is a good concept. Run with it." And so that's how that's what made me decide to approach artist Ruben Rojas, colorist Whitney Kogar, letterer T.C. Hopkins. And I had said, let's just make this book. Just like Spencer and Locke, I said, come hell or high water, I will get this thing made out of spite if I have to. We had publishers who were interested, but better than most about, the way that acquisitions tends to work in comics. It's very hurry up and wait. And so you'll have people say, this is a really cool concept. I'm really excited. I'm really interested. And then they won't sort of put the contract in front of you. It'll sort of, other things get in their way. Other things take priority. I get that. But I got to the point where I had wanted to do a Kickstarter, and the pandemic had hit and Diamond had just shut down. And I said, we had 2 issues of the OZ in the can, and I had written the other 4 issues. Why not solve one problem with another? I can introduce myself to this whole demographic of readers that I'd done no outreach to, and show off some of my best work, and give the OZ a home. And almost $50,000 later, I feel like that was
Nice.
a good move.
Yeah.
I'm very excited to get everybody's books in their hands. That's going to be my plans for the next, really for the rest of the year, is just packing and shipping, taking this 1,000-pound pallet of books and trying to get it all to the post office.
The best tip I've heard regarding that from Jimmy Palmiotti is buy your post office lunch one day as a thank you.
That's a great idea. I will definitely.
What I mean? Yeah. I mean, that's, again, Jimmy's got us both beat in terms of experience and how to work with people. Yeah. And I love that about him. And truly, that's been one of the fun things as I interview people that do Kickstarters, are what are the little things you do that help the people that help you put the books out.
Absolutely. I mean, it's so much of a learning process. I mean, because I was lucky. Zach Quaintance, the editor over at Comics Bookcase, he had done a Kickstarter shortly before. I think he started a week before I did, and so we were able to compare notes a little bit. And he was telling me, "Oh, first off, your eyes are going to be glued to your Kickstarter for 30 days. It'll be like a compulsion. You will want to see
Oh yeah.
what's going
Well,
on."
yeah.
But also just making sure I went into this Kickstarter thinking, how do we make $6,000 in 30 days?
Sure.
And then in 2 hours, we blew through that. And I said, oh, I got to come up with a whole new game plan right here, right now on the fly. It's one of those things in retrospect. You're not just like playing a new ball game. You're like playing a different sport and on a different planet. And so for me, it's kind of figuring out what can we do to keep offering more things to our readers without blowing up the bank in terms of our shipping. I've seen Kickstarters in the past off of the moon and then realize, oh, that does not fit in a Gemini mailer. That does not fit in a flat rate envelope. And suddenly they're eating a whole lot of money on a Kickstarter that they shouldn't be. So that's been it's been a learning process for sure. I mean, I feel like we did a lot of things right with this Kickstarter, and we got lucky in a lot of ways as well. We were right up there with Scott Snyder with his book Noctera. You're right up there with Keanu Reeves, that small independent filmmaker.
Heard of
it. And so I think a lot of people were checking out Kickstarter at the time. But there are certain things that, like, looking back, I'm figuring I'm probably going to do a little differently next time, particularly having all of our variant covers in separate tiers rather than have it be a question that people have to answer, because then I have to chase down people to answer those questions. I think comics in general, you're sort of betting on yourself. And oftentimes the paradigm is you bet on yourself until a publisher is willing to say you're worth the risk. And now I think in a post-COVID environment, that's not necessarily the case anymore. I love publishers and I'm working with publishers, and I have a book coming out with a publisher that I'll be talking about later tonight. But there is something to be said for rolling the dice on yourself. And I know you can attest to that. Running Word Balloon is, sometimes waiting for somebody to have faith in you. You might be waiting forever. Sometimes the way you get faith in yourself is by proving to the world, I deserve this. And I think, working with a team like Ruben and Whitney and Dave Hopkins, that's my secret as a comics creator, is I just work with people who are so talented that you have to like the book no matter who wrote it. And so, it certainly frees me up. I don't feel imposter syndrome because I know I'm working with the best of the best. And so what that does, it just inspires me to bring my A game. And it makes me just feel a little bit confident that knowing the worst possible review will be, well, the art was good. That feels very freeing for me, I think.
The art is good. That's the good news. And the story's good too, man. No, that's terrific. And I'm glad that that things worked out as well as they have. And again, you're learning as you go, and it's good to gather that Kickstarter audience and see where you stand, and the ability to make your own stuff and not have to wait for that publisher to say yes to that next job. And as you said, we are going to talk about, if you don't mind, I would like to get into it. You've got a book coming up from Aftershock.
Yes.
And it's out in February. Is it in previews now?
It's in previews now. It's actually coming out January 6th. So you can you can pre-order our first issue through Monday, December 14th, I believe is that date. Is
excellent.
I think that Monday. The book is called Scout's Honor.
Yes, indeed. I'm going to bring up an article that has some lovely art while you're talking, and we will look at some of the art from Luca
Casalanguida. Yes.
Thank you. Easier for you to say. Very good, Casalanguida.
a lot of practice on my end so far. Luca is a real pro. We've got also this amazing cover you see by Andy Clark. He and Jose Villarrubia are doing all of our covers. They look gorgeous.
Yeah.
So Scout's Honor it's the story of years after a nuclear apocalypse, a cult rises from the ashes, and their Bible is an old Boy Scout manual. And so the Scout's Honor sort of goes further into the future and says, okay, what happens to this cult? What do they look like? How do they behave? And we follow a young scout named Kit, who really kind of embodies all this sort of survivalist doctrines of the Ranger Scouts of America. There's only one hitch. This society is very male driven, and so they don't allow women to serve. And so Kit has had to hide her identity in order to pursue her true calling as a Ranger Scout. The problem is that while she's on a mission, she actually discovers a pretty harrowing secret at the heart of the Ranger Scout history. And it's really going to kind of turn her entire worldview on its head. So she's going to have to really go on this dangerous quest to find the truth, all while losing her religion. So I've sort of likened this to be like Mad Max meets Mulan with a little bit of The Handmaid's Tale thrown in for good measure. Yeah, it's a funny book because in a lot of ways, I'm usually very deliberate in what kind of concepts I pursue. They usually are a very long time coming. Scouts Honor kind of cut the line in a lot of ways. Getting into a little bit of the nitty gritty, certain publishers, you pitch them in certain ways. And I've been talking with Aftershock for a long time, hot in the heels of my first book, Spencer and Locke. I've known Mike Martz for over a decade. I interned for him when he was at DC. I worked with him on Batman R.I.P. When I was a young, excitable college student. I've known Steve Rotterdam, also from his time at DC. I've chatted with Lee Kramer a lot of times. And so I think that trifecta, after talking with them and sort of knocking on the door a bunch of times, they finally are like, okay, kid, what do you got? And so that was Lee's first mistake, was that I then sent him, I think, a dozen log lines. And Scouts Honor was kind of the one that came on last. I had just came up with this idea of, history is not just written by the victors, it's also written by the survivors. And so what happens if you have a new Dark Ages where sort of that game of telephone gets cut and all you can find, whatever you can find becomes sort of the touchstone of a new society. And so, thinking about an old Boy Scout manual, I was kind of like, that's interesting. My younger brothers served as Boy Scouts. And so for them, the organization was about self-sufficiency and practical skills and camaraderie. But being on the outside, you have all the pageantry and you have the Scout laws and you have, the merit badges, and it can look a little like a cult. And, it's one of those things I sent all these ideas, and they immediately zeroed in on Scouts Honor. They're like, that one sounds really cool. Like, can you flesh this out? And I wound up putting a lot of myself into that book, surprisingly. I think those are always kind of the most fun experiences for me as a creator is, it's figuring out how do you make your readers care about this? What's like the human core behind the outlandish high concept? And so for me, I grew up in a pretty conservative, politically Jewish household in the Midwest. And I didn't really have sort of my political and spiritual reawakening until I left home. But, now I'm sort of seen as like the pinko commie of my family, of my Missouri dwelling parents still. And so I think a lot of that journey got translated into Kits in Scouts Honor. It's like sort of you grow up believing something. And, I feel like her belief in the Ranger Scouts and the religion behind it, that's what's helped her survive, the perils of the Colorado Badlands. So what happens when these people that she's looked up to as heroes and saviors and role models, turns out that, what if there's something a little bit more sinister going on underneath? I talked a lot. My partner was raised Catholic. And she really kind of gravitated away from the church in the wake of the Catholic sex abuse scandals. Yeah. And, she told me a lot about sort of the disillusionment that she felt in the wake of that. And so that's a lot of what Scouts Honor has beyond sort of the post-apocalyptic action. It's how do you navigate sort of the spiritual tenets, the things that sort of help shape you into who you are, while still kind of navigating the human institution, which can be kind of corrupt and sort of mired in compromise. And it's a book about losing your religion. It's a book about toxic masculinity, but it's also a book about explosives and tactical driving merit badges. I mean, it's being able to have my cake and eating it too. I get to have kind of the wild, outlandish high concepts while having something a little bit human for people to latch onto.
That's great, man. No, and you mentioned obviously the scandals of the Catholic Church. The Boy Scouts are certainly going through.
Yes.
I mean, my God, do they survive this scandal? I have no idea, and it's such a shame because I was a Cub Scout. I didn't stick with it to become a Boy Scout. Yeah. But that was a big deal in my generation.
Absolutely.
And it was good. There's a code of honor there, and it's a shame that much like the Catholic Church, some people abuse that code and turn things into a very horrible situation. But my God, you don't want to. I'm really bummed that it's going to result likely in the disbanding of the Scouts because goddamn the Terrificon in Connecticut.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
my buddy Mitch Halleck runs that show, and he has the Scouts run the rooms and just kind of keep things orderly. Both the Scout leaders and the troops themselves, really good people, just decent people and everything, and not looking for not that they're Hell's Angels, not looking for any trouble per se, but really just good people. Just all right, let's whatever. If somebody's mobbing a creator, hey, take it easy and stuff. Just very sweet people, and they're good guys. And it's just like I said, it's a damn shame when the scandal broke. I'm like, oh man, that blows.
That's the thing. I mean, it's when I came up with this book, I came up with the core concept for this is a little over a year ago.
Okay.
It was. Or maybe it was last summer, I would say. So a little less than a year and a half ago. And I wasn't expecting the book to be quite as current as it is now.
Sure.
I wrote this book. I wrote the majority of it during the pandemic. Writing something post-apocalyptic in these times is a weird sensation. You kind of feel like, what's the stuff I'm putting out into the world
right
now? To get a little Grant Morrison here.
Sure.
But at the same time, exactly like you said, sort of, the Boy Scouts are back in the headlines and not for great reasons.
Yeah.
It is a shame. And, because I feel like you said, there are true believers out there who these institutions really shape them, and they shape them in a positive way.
Yep.
I feel like, it's sort of like, it's like my parents' generation, it's like they viewed religion in the way that my generation maybe views therapy. It's sort of that way to kind of help, get you through difficult times.
Absolutely.
And the way to sort of help sort of shape your ethical compass a little bit.
All true.
And that's the thing for, in Scouts Honor is, it's very easy to see how the archetype of the Boy Scout might mutate in the wild. One of my favorite bits in the book, for example, that we talk about a little later in the series, is one of their rites of passage is you get what's called a switchblade. But the game of telephone has been so distorted that they say, well, the original Scouts legend says that they had these giant swords that had these specialized blades inside of them. So you would have like a wedge blade to tear apart armor, or some shears to tear through foliage, or a flamethrower component to start a fire. And so that's what they've been building in the apocalypse. Or like I said, the merit badges, it's not just things like archery or wilderness survival, but you've also got combat medicine. You've got explosives, you've got tactical driving, because I loved the idea that any troop, what skills everyone's bringing to the table just by looking at them.
Sure.
It's sort of, it's very, sort of a very military metal kind of thing. But yeah, ultimately it comes down to things, it's the ethics of it all. The Boy Scouts actually have the actual laws, saying, for example, a Scout's honor must never be in question. That felt like something that we would take into our mutated 7 Scout laws for this book, where they've built their own 10 commandments, and the founder of the Ranger Scouts, Dr. Jefferson Hancock, is seen as sort of this martyr messiah in the same way that, we see Jesus today. And so things like you must obey your scoutmaster without question. That's a monkey's paw kind of law, where that can turn bad real fast.
Sure.
And Kit has been just raised as a true believer. She was rescued by the Ranger Scouts when she was a young child. She and her father were their caravan was attacked by raiders. And so she's grown up believing these guys are the heroes. And so this is all she's wanted to do, despite the fact that, she's kind of had to fly in the face of one of their major laws, which is only men can serve. She says, well, I'm a scout. I know I'm a scout. And so I'm going to do whatever I have to. I'm going to hide whatever I have to in order to be this. And now she's going to realize, first off, I'm not the only one with secrets. And she's going to find that the truth can be just as corrosive as holding onto a lie. So yeah, it's, for a book that's about a post-apocalyptic Boy Scout cult, I was kind of surprised as I was diving into it that I was like, this really speaks to my journey, growing up, sort of figuring, leaving home for the first time and figuring out there are other political beliefs and you don't have to smash them down. You can actually listen and grow and change your mind. It certainly spoke to sort of my spiritual journey. I don't talk about it too often, but I'm a practicing Jew.
Okay.
And it's one of those things for me. It's, I view it as it's my way of throwing a penny in the well of the universe. I have no idea if sort of the way that I practice does anything in the grand scheme of things, but I know that it's part of who I am. And I know that it kind of shapes the way that I navigate through life. And so seeing how Kit kind of has to sort that out for herself, that wound up being a really interesting journey for me as a writer to explore. A lot of my books, I think, are about characters who have marinated in trauma for a long time. Detective Locke has, grew up, in an abusive household, Spencer and Locke, and Dorothy and the OZ, has seen a lot in Iraq and Afghanistan. But Kit in Scout's Honor, she's actually a lot more fresh-faced, despite growing up in the apocalypse. We get to kind of watch her trauma unfold in real time and watch her kind of have to find her feet on the fly. But that said, it is the apocalypse. She is growing up in a very cutthroat society. So she's going to have a lot to contend with while on her quest to finding the truth.
Is this a finite series? What's the plan for this?
Yes. Yeah, so this is going to be a 5-issue series. First issue's out January 6th. And yeah, it'll be going January, February, March, April through May. Fingers crossed as long as everything cooperates with the pandemic. So 5 issues. And yeah, this has just been such a fun series to work on, despite kind of the heaviness of the subject matter. My creative team, Luca Casalanguida, is just an amazing collaborator. He's got a real grittiness to his work. He kind of reminds me in some ways of Jock, with Scott Snyder, that he's able to kind of have a little bit of these heavier edges to his line work, but he also plays with contrast a lot. So you'll see, Kit, our lead character, she's designed purposely androgynously because obviously she's trying to pass in the society. But when the action starts, suddenly the shadows really crank up, and you can see, Kit is not just like this very thoughtful, introspective woman, but she can kill you. She's been trained from a very young age in all these different forms of combat and all these different forms of weaponry. And so she's not somebody you want to be on the wrong side of. And the way that Luke is able to kind of switch, at the drop of a hat between these two tones is just really incredible. Working with colorist Matt Milla from Daredevil, among other series, he's been really a terrific partner for Luca. Carlos Manguel, our letterer, he's added some really fun texture to the mix. I tend to be usually very conservative in the way that I do my lettering, and he has really kind of pushed the envelope in a really cool way that really kind of shows the flavor of this kind of post-apocalyptic world. And I would be remiss if I also didn't give some shout outs to our editors. Mike Martz has been a real mentor to me, since my intern days, really.
Yeah, that's cool.
And really kind of inspired me to take the indie route. I remember him telling me nobody walks under the Yankees. And that was sort of the big aha moment that made me think, oh, he's right. Like, I don't want to think that I can run before I can walk. I want to put out my own work and my own storytelling and really hone my own voice as a storyteller. But the real sort of patron saint of this book, it's Christina Harrington, our other editor on the book. She has championed Scout's Honor since the initial pitch. She has made the book a better product because she's been a part of it. She is really, she has looked out for this book since day one. She was the one who was like, let's bring Matt Milla on, for example. And I was like, oh, I didn't think I was allowed to ask for somebody that big, but yes. So she's been just really supportive of this series and honestly, one of the best editors I've ever worked with. But yeah, it's sort of when you put all of these people in a room together, it's a humbling experience. I make no bones that, out of that group, I'm the newcomer here. And yet sort of the pressure's on me to make sure that we deliver something that readers will enjoy. And so it's been a really wonderful lesson and a really wonderful experience, because now I know, having done Scout's Honor, I'm not going to choke. You can put me at home plate, and I will swing, and I promise I'll connect. But yeah, it's just been it's been a very different experience from any of the other books I've put together. I've said sort of the behind the scenes has just as much in common with a place like the Big Two as it is a creator-owned book. I'm not the central conduit, for example, for all the creative decisions anymore. I'm not the central financier for all the for the book anymore. And that has been a really fun experience for me, is sort of being able to say, oh, well, you got to measure twice and cut once, because it's this going, I'm not the conduit anymore. My notes have to go through Mike and Christina, and they sort of get to say, well, yeah, that's a good idea. Or, David, I think you're getting a little too into the weeds. Let that one go. Especially also, working with an artist, English is not his first language. And so we keep talking about the game of telephone. That has been a fun game of telephone, is we're like, okay, I'm going to talk to Mike and Christina, and they're going to talk to Luca's agent, and Luca's agent's going to talk to Luca. And that's how we're sort of going to daisy chain this book together.
Sure.
It's been a really fun experience. And I think it's one that feels a lot more representative of the way that a lot of direct market books are put together. And I think that's ultimately it's been the kick in the pants that I needed to kind of up my game as a storyteller, and to really kind of think in advance, what are my editors going to need? What are my collaborators going to need? What is this story going to need to make sure that all the math adds up? Because ultimately the buck stops here.
Tell me about, you mentioned that you interned for Mike Martz back in the day. Do you have any good stories of that R.I.P. Batman Grant Morrison period?
Yeah, well, that was the same summer that The Dark Knight came out, and so I remember that was just the office was buzzing when that came out, and I remember I was actually left to man the phones while everybody else went and saw The Dark Knight. And I don't hold that against them 12 years later or anything, but yeah, it was such a wonderful experience. Mike was really kind of seen as, elder statesman is not really the right word, but I think, he was seen as very much a leader when I was over there. He was running the Bat books at the time, and like I said, this was during Batman R.I.P. This was during Final Crisis. That was Grant Morrison's big summer. He had a lot going on, and I do remember a lot of people sort of being like, "Okay, how do we keep the trains even remotely on schedule during this summer?" There were a few very tense moments as far as that was concerned. But yeah, it was. I remember, for example, this shows how far back this was going. I actually scanned in original pages for J.H. Williams's Batwoman run. When he and Greg Rucka sort of reintroduced the character.
Absolutely. Just
And
talked to Jim about that last week.
He's a sweetheart. I interviewed him way back in the day, and he was incredibly gracious. I worked on that. I remember they gave me, it was Final Crisis. It was the issue with Black Lightning. And I think that was either Resist or Submit. But I remember there was a lot of moving parts that had to go in for that, because if I recall correctly, the book was like racing towards the deadline, and so I remember working very hard with Adam Schlagman, who's now working over in the film division, to make sure that thing sort of got across the finish line. I remember distinctly the first rumblings of Batman and Superman versus vampires and werewolves. I remember how deeply excited Dan was over that book. I couldn't help but be a little excited listening to him talk about that. But yeah, that was such a big learning experience for me, because first off, it gave me permission to think like, oh, this could be a career.
Yep.
Like I said, I grew up in the conservative Midwest. I did not know anybody who had a full-time creative job. I didn't know screenwriters. Certainly didn't know comics writers or anybody involved in publishing. And I kind of got that internship. It was partially as a lark, but like a 3-year lark that I had been knocking at people's doors for 3 years over it. And so that when I did that summer, I said, oh, like you can have a career doing this. And so that was kind of the snowball off the top of the mountain that then kind of turned into, oh, if you can be working in comics, maybe you can be a comics writer. And oh crap, you just made a book on accident. Now you have to sell it. But the big thing was this was during the recession. And so that was kind of a really heartbreaking moment for me was, have you ever seen that episode of Star Trek where Picard goes back in time and he fixes his greatest mistake and he winds up like never getting above an ensign level?
Tapestry. Yeah.
Yeah. And, he says you can do everything right and still lose. And that's just life. And that experience at DC, that's how I felt. I feel like I was certainly a very excitable, eager college student, because who wouldn't be walking into those offices? But, everybody had said, we really liked having you as an intern. There's just no jobs. It's the recession. There's nothing going on. And I feel like I got a lot of really good advice from a lot of the different editors there about, if you want to work in this industry, finding ways to kind of keep your foot in the middle of things while you figure out what you want to do. Mike's big advice of saying, like, most people do not walk into DC. They are usually doing other jobs.
Yes,
or,
definitely.
or if they have an entry-level position at DC, it is not usually as editorial. It's usually they are working in a different department and then sort of sidestep their way into editorial.
Yep.
But that became sort of the core of my philosophy in making comics. And it's one of the reasons why I love independent comics so much, is because Mike was right. It's that, you have to earn people's trust in this business. And it's not a one-time thing. This is over, I don't know if I necessarily subscribe to you're only as good as your last work, but I do subscribe in that you're only as good as your war chest.
Agreed.
And so, continuing to kind of build your back catalog, that was Mike. And I kept telling him every time I would see him at cons, I'd be like, this is your fault. And, he would he would downplay it. But I think in an industry where it can be chaotic at the best of times, Mike was the one who was willing to tell me straight, that like, if you want to be in this, you have to keep earning your way in. And and even this experience with Aftershock, I don't think I'm speaking out of school. This was not my first pitch to them. I have pitched them several times over the course of the last year and a half, I believe, or 2 years at this point. And I remember Lee telling me of a fairly big name creator who works with them saying, that person had to pitch us a whole bunch of things before we found the right project. And that's something that I always tell fellow creators, especially people who are trying to sort of get their foot in the door, is rejection's your friend. First off, if a publisher rejects you or rejects a pitch, it's not you. It's just that that pitch specifically might not be the right fit for what they're doing. And it is best for you and for them to tell you that now. Because that way you can sort of figure out what you want to do with that pitch elsewhere. You can dust it off, you can reimagine it, or you can sort of put it on a shelf and say, I'm going to let this percolate for a little while I work on something else.
Absolutely.
Or you can let it go. It might not be ready for prime time. That happens. But, it's one of those things. I have always found that failure and rejection is my greatest fuel.
Absolutely, man. You learn from your failures.
Yeah. Well,
that's, truly, you do. That's, God forbid you have a lucky streak and everything is gold, because you're stabbing in the dark, man. You got to learn from, the strikeouts as much as the singles, doubles, triples, and home runs. Absolutely, man.
And the thing is, for me, I'm also like, my best quality is my worst quality, which is I'm deeply, deeply stubborn. Going back to my first book, Spencer and Locke, there were a lot of people who did not want to pitch or did not want to publish a book that was What If Calvin and Hobbes Grew Up in Sin City. A top 5 publisher told me that was the best pitch he would never publish. And I still wear that as a badge of honor. That rejection was the best thing that could have happened to me. Because it was exactly in the right way that I was like, okay, like there's something here. And I think with Aftershock, I think they kind of learned, he's going to keep pitching us. So I guess we have to relent. We need to find something to work with him on. They've just been, they have been really wonderful and sort of matchmaking this book, bringing Luca on board, bringing Matt and Carlos on board. For me, it was a weird experience. I'm so used to sweating all the details, figuring out, well, who's going to be the right guy for this book? And to have that out of my hands, it's a different type of, it's writing at an angle, so to speak, because you're kind of like, okay, like I know the vision that my editors and my publisher want for this book. And how do I tailor my writing to fit this art style that I hadn't considered? And that's been a really eye-opening and I think really wonderful experience to learn. And I think that's always been my struggle as a creator, is to just be like, okay, what hills do I need to actually die on? And which hills are my collaborators going to murder me on if I bring it up? And I think Scout's Honor in a lot of ways has been very helpful for me in saying, okay, like when do I have to pivot to make this story flow? And okay. I think that's ultimately made me a more flexible writer, and I think that's only a good thing.
Fair enough. Okay. What else have you got coming up? So we got the OC, we got Scout's Honor. So
sure.
You got that sci-fi book we talked about.
Yeah, Grand Theft Astro.
Grand Theft Astro, yes, indeed.
Yes,
so what's the status
hard at work
on that?
On that. Jordi Perez is back in the saddle. He's hard at work on art right now. He's actually finished inks on the first issue and is barreling ahead on issue 2 as we speak.
Cool.
So yeah, for those who don't know what Grand Theft Astro is about, I say it's Fast and the Furious meets Back to the Future in space. It's the story of Hakeem Henriksen, who races for power and pink slips as the fastest star chaser in the galaxy. Unfortunately, he decides to test out a new quantum supercharger in the middle of a race, and it tears open a wormhole that throws him 7 years into the future. And so Hakeem is going to have to really reconnect with a universe that's long since passed him by. And he's going to have to team up with his ex-lover and his formerly younger brother, who is now older than him, for a faster than light heist for a piece of technology that might be able to send him back home. So it's been a really fun book. It's just been sort of getting all of our ducks in a row in terms of the scheduling, because Jordy has been very high in demand with books like Queen of Bad Dreams. He recently did a story for Firefly over at Boom. And so I was like, that's cool. Like, I will just write the whole series and it will be ready for you when you come back. And so he's back in the saddle. All 6 issues are written. This is a really fun book. It's sort of my first sci-fi series. I've done crime, I've done fantasy, I've done post-apocalyptic, but this is like hard sci-fi. And, I really get to tap into, I love the Fast and the Furious. Fast 5 and Fast 7 are amazing. I even get to tap into like some classic Mark Waid Flash.
Fun.
Yeah. Terminal Velocity was like a very seminal book for me as a kid. So sort of that idea of what happens when you move too fast. And what are the sorts of things you could leave behind if you're not paying attention? It's also just a book about arrogance and, what happens when you're used to winning and suddenly the whole world has lapped you. And sort of, I'm the oldest sibling out of 4. My younger siblings are triplets. And
wow,
this idea came from, my younger brother decided to move out to Los Angeles, same way that I did. And I love my brother and I was so excited that he was coming out. But I'll admit my very first reaction when I was told that he was going to be moving down the street from me was, wait a minute, like he's almost a decade younger than me. Like he's well ahead of where I was at his age. And thinking, oh, there's a story to that. When you race the spaceways, everything becomes a competition. And sort of how do you collaborate on an Ocean's 11 Fast and the Furious style heist when you're kind of subconsciously in competition with the very people you're supposed to be relying on?
I understand. Yeah.
So I'm very excited about that series. TBD about when it's coming out exactly. We're still kind of figuring out. It really will depend on the art and just sort of how fast that comes together. But Jordy's doing a terrific job on it. I couldn't be more thrilled.
The preview art you showed me, man, really blew my mind. And it's so when it's ready, we'll definitely talk about it.
It's going to be fun. I do have some other projects in the works. I just wrapped a story in the Nightmare Theater horror anthology called Die Die Danger Ronin, which is what if the Power Rangers went head to head with The Walking Dead?
Funny. What is Nightmare Theater?
Sure. So Nightmare Theater just wrapped up their Kickstarter a few weeks ago, but it was a series of, I think it was a 225-page anthology, all based on film and television.
Fun.
And so Dave Schrader, the writer of Baby Badass over at Action Lab, he's been part of my Action Lab crew ever since at the beginning. And he told me, he's like, listen, I've got this anthology coming. I really want you to do a story. And I was like, well, I don't know. I had never written horror before. And he was like, but it's anything about film and television. And I was like, okay, I could do something there. I am teaming up with my my Spencer and Locke co-creator, Jorge Santiago Jr. on a superhero one-shot. And you know what? Because you're a pal and because I love the word balloon community, I'll spill some details on this series. It's a one shot for now, but who knows? It might expand a little bit. It'll originally be in the pages of the Big Hype anthology, which will be hitting Kickstarter in 2021. But our book is called Roxy Rewind. And this is a character that I've had in my head for a very long time. This predates Spencer and Locke. Juniper Wells is the first ever daughter of 2 time travelers. Her mother is a car hop from the 1950s. Her father is a temporal physicist from the late 2200s. They decided to raise her in our present to split the difference. And as the first ever child of 2 time travelers, Juniper has the ability to manipulate time up to 60 seconds. And so when a supervillain from outside of the time stream tries to rob her father's lab while Juniper's on a field trip, she will wind up becoming a time traveling, roller derby loving superhero called Roxy Rewind. It's sort of my love letter to classic Spider-Man, but with some of the sort of the time travel elements of say a Back to the Future. Yeah. Roxy's been a character that I wrote a pilot script for her years ago, thinking maybe I would go towards animation before I sort of got the hint that maybe I should write for comics. And it was a concept that I'd been wanting to do for a long time and never found the time. And Doug Wood, the organizer behind the Big Hype Anthology, he said, "Listen, we'd love to have you contribute a full-length story to this anthology. Do you have any ideas in mind?" And I'm still working on Spencer and Locke Volume 3. It's been a lot of moving parts while juggling a bunch of other projects. And we're doing Garfield versus Peanuts in our 3rd volume. So there's a lot of research to go into it. So poor Jorge has been waiting for me for scripts. And so I knew he was the guy I wanted to bring Roxy to life. And so I said, buddy, while you're waiting for me on this, do you want to totally switch gears from our very dark crime noir series to something that's like very fun and energetic and action packed? And, Jorge he's an artist. I've never seen him back down from a challenge. I've never seen him hit anything less than a home run. And Roxy is going to be no exception. He is putting the finishing touches on inks this week, actually. And we're working with Jim Campbell on lettering for it. And it's just, it's very different than what most people would associate with my brand, which is usually ruining childhood. This is more of sort of, I get to embrace it a little bit. And really, I've always felt superheroes are a tough nut to crack doing them independently. If you're not Marvel or DC.
Oh, 100%.
So if I was going to do a superhero story, it was going to be it had to be something that felt like it had a little bit of a different angle.
Totally.
And Roxy, in a lot of ways, she's a different twist on the immigrant story that Clark Kent was all the way at the beginning. She is the definition of not from around here. And her parents are absolutely the definition of not from around here. They're still kind of dealing with a little bit of culture shock in living in the 21st century. And Juniper kind of has to find her own path as the 2nd generation immigrant. And that was sort of the through line that I talked to Jorge about. And I think, that kind of makes for a fun, eclectic, textured superhero story that feels a little different than, the well-earned, well-established characters at Marvel and DC and Valiant.
Very cool. Excellent. Joe Mulvey has a question.
Oh, yeah.
And that is, what are some of the creators that got you into making comics?
Well, first off, thank you, Mulvey. I love Joe. For those who don't know Joe, he's been responsible for our variant covers for Spencer and Locke. Also the artist on Wailing Blade. So if you haven't checked out Joe's work, you really should. The creators that have gotten me into making comics, there's a few. Old school Frank Miller, for sure. Daredevil, The Man Without Fear that was the book that made me realize as a kid, oh, real people make these books. It's not just kind of done by committee. There's a real voice to it. I don't think my parents should have given me that book as a 7-year-old, but like it blew my mind. I loved it. Devin Grayson.
I love
another
Devin.
huge. I love Devin.
She's great.
She was so gracious. I don't send fan letters often, but when Spencer and Locke came out, I made an exception for her. And I sent her a message saying, her run on Batman Gotham Knights is so influential on my style.
I understand.
You should, if you haven't read it, check it out on Comixology. It is delightful, sad Batman.
Great Batman writer. I'm kicking myself. We did this amazing
Mhm.
bad event, and I did
Mhm.
reach back and get classic bad creators. And shame on me because she has, every now and then she'll do something comics related, but
Sure.
it's been a while.
Yeah.
And I check in with her at least once a year, like, hey, if you want to come back.
Yeah.
But you're right, man. No, during her DC Prime,
Hmm.
no, she's an exceptional writer and a great Batman writer.
Yeah, she really kind of made me think about like the psychology of these characters, especially dealing with trauma and how that kind of gets externalized later on in life. So Devin was a huge influence.
Am I right in terms of Black Widow?
Yeah, she just
I was going to say, I think a lot of the movie is kind of dipping into her territory of Black Widow, and
yeah.
that's going to be great to see what they do with her ideas.
She also just did a one shot for Yelena. I don't remember the character's last name.
Oh,
And
Blonde Black Widow.
yeah, Blonde Black Widow and
It's the easiest way to do it.
Red Guardian, I think is that the guy's name?
Yeah.
She just did a team up book with the two of them. This I think it was last week. That was terrific.
Oh shit! Well, I'm gonna have to bug her. I'm glad you said something.
Grant Morrison for sure. Jeff Johns.
Of course.
I worked on a lot of Jeff books when I was interning at DC. So I worked on Green Lantern Secret Origin, and that was like a real learning experience for me in terms of exploring character. And he does such great work at figuring out extracting character out of metaphor. If you've ever read, getting very deep into the weeds here, but there's an issue of Justice Society of America called Bells and Whistles, where it goes into Jesse Quick's origin or re-origin as Liberty Bell. And she winds up saying to Damage, who at the time is disfigured from Professor Zoom, she points to the logo on her chest and she says, just because something has a crack in it doesn't mean you throw it away. And it's one of my single favorite issues of comics. I think about it all the time because, yeah, you take that iconography of the Liberty Bell and you're able to really draw a human story out of it.
That's awesome.
Rick Remender, love the way he does the way he choreographs action and pacing is really kind of second to none.
It's funny you mentioned Rick because honestly, based on what you're doing with all your different books and stuff, when whatever book really breaks through for you, David, much like Rick, much like Bendis, you're going to have a nice library of, oh, you like my stuff? Check out some of the stuff that I've done in years past.
That is the kindest compliment coming from you. Thank you so much for saying that. I have said for the longest time, I want to be a 30-year man in this business. I look at Dan Slott as a big influence, and he was going to be kind of the guy who rounded out my list. He taught a course at Comics Experience way back in the day while I was interning at DC. And so I learned how to write character from Dan. And he's a guy who he is so clever and he is so enthusiastic that, you're going to have to carry him out of this business on the stretcher. And he's got the back catalog to prove it. And that's the guy I want to be. Is the Dan Slotts, the Grant Morrisons, the people who they have a long and lengthy back catalog.
Sure.
I'm not the guy who, and maybe this is the worst thing to say in an interview about a book that I have in stores that you should pre-order now, but I'm not the guy who's like sweating the numbers. That's not who I am. I'm the worst son of an economist that I don't care about the numbers. What I care about is, can I go to sleep at night? Is this book something that I feel like I've left it all out in the field?
I'm with you.
And I've been really fortunate that in an industry that you do have to compromise, I haven't had to compromise on that.
That's excellent, man.
And so, I feel like, and I feel like that's sort of the best of the business is those are the people who you can see their voices come out. Sometimes they have to fight really hard for their voices to come out. Sometimes the powers that be don't always see the forest for the trees.
Right. But the business is changing now too. And, when Slott and Johns and those guys, I mean, their image existed.
Yeah.
But it really, it was still really the big two's game.
Sure.
Mostly. And it really has only been in the last 20 years that we really have seen the creator-owned world really explode. and you don't have to deal with the big two, or you can make your mark at the big two, take the audience with you.
Right.
Again, recurring conversation right
Yeah.
here on Word Balloon, and again, it's Rick's a great example of that, even more so in that he spent his time at DC and Marvel,
Sure.
but didn't really spend that much time, and as soon as he was able to,
Right.
jumped away and has been doing great with all of his creator-owned stuff.
There's a real pendulum, like you said, between sort of the creator-owned side and the big licensed side, and they feed into each other, and sort of you're not going to get the innovation in the big licensed side without having that creator-owned, but you're also not going to have that big audience on the creator-owned side without the licensed side. So they're symbiotic, and they feed into one another, and that's, I think, looking back sort of on my career, if I could tell my 22-year-old self who was thinking, I blew my one shot, and am I ever going to be in this industry? That's the thing. You never have just one shot. You're constantly reinventing yourself. You're constantly knocking on doors. You're constantly throwing things against the wall and seeing what sticks. And I feel like the last 10 years, especially, I mean, post Brian K. Vaughan Vertigo, you see, The Walking Dead, you see John Layman on Chew, you see Justin Jordan on Hickman.
Justin Jordan, absolutely.
Those are the guys that really kind of made me think like, oh, there's so much more to comics than even I could have envisioned as a kid.
Yep.
And I think that if you had asked me as a kid, you're going to be a comics writer, but you're not going to be writing Spider-Man. Right. You're not going to be writing the Justice League. I would have looked at you like you had two heads. I would have said back then, what's the point?
What else is there? Exactly.
And now I see comics are the Wild West, but they're also they're the cutting edge of entertainment. They're the places that we can get so weird, but we still have that human element that grounds it. I always joke that, and this is probably the common denominator between all of my books, is that they're trash concepts that I make you fall in love with and or cry about.
You're right though. But that's what it's always been, and its predecessors, the pulps and things like that.
Exactly.
No, this is outlaw media. I mean, that's the
a great way to describe it.
I'm stealing from Frank Miller, calling it that, frankly. But it's true. And now with Kickstarter, with these other avenues and platforms to get your work out there and stuff. No, man. I mean, Justin Jordan's a great example of that. He doesn't need DC and Marvel to make his stuff. Yeah,
that's the future. I mean, you hit it right in the head. Is that crowdfunding is the future? I think you see a lot of publishers who are doing stuff with that now. The fact that Boom did their Berserker
with Keanu,
with Keanu Reeves on Kickstarter. You see Top Cow just launched a second volume of Witchblade on Kickstarter. I think you see, Scott Snyder, Ed Brisson is doing a Kickstarter right now.
Talking to Ed tomorrow, absolutely.
And you see these creators of all different kind of audience sizes who are saying, oh, this is a different audience. It's not the direct market audience. It's not the Wednesday Warriors. It's not the people going to cons. It's not the people buying things on Amazon. This is a totally different demographic with some limited overlap. But I think it's incumbent upon us as creators to try to wrangle up that diaspora a little bit and say, okay, like I've got fans here and here and here and here, and let's kind of let's bring them all to the same table and have them break bread.
Yep.
And, Kickstarter, kind of going back to what you were saying earlier in our conversation, it's been so empowering for me. I knew how to put together a book just from my previous work. And I've known from my time at Newsarama and my time with my other books how to promote a book. But I didn't know anything about printing a book. I didn't know anything about distributing or shipping a book. Now I do. And that was the third heat.
I'm with you.
And so
now I understand, man. Go on.
Now it's like, if I am in love enough with an idea that I would self-publish it out of spite. It's not even self-publishing it out of spite anymore, because ultimately you are able to kind of get a better deal than you might in a lot of other places.
Totally.
Where you're able to really finance your work in a way that I've been fortunate working, with a place like Aftershock where they have fronted the bill on a book. But there are other smaller indie places where you might not be that fortunate and you might be
Right.
making a book at a loss. And so Kickstarter can eliminate that. And so I think it's tough. It's involved. It's certainly not a process for
Right.
everybody.
Well, you got to get
And
your hands dirty yourself rather than
yes,
rely on a company with an infrastructure that
yes,
can handle those aspects of the device.
yes.
And listen, I mean, you don't have to convince me about Aftershock. They're my sponsor, and
Yeah,
I like what they do, and I
yeah,
think they have a good editorial taste
absolutely.
about things that they say yes to,
Yeah,
and they are trying to entertain a different audience from the superhero world,
exactly.
and I appreciate that about them. But again, right now it's there's this direct ability through
Sure.
uh, all the crowdfunding apparatus that's out there to really
Yeah,
say I am making this kind of book. What do you think, audience? Do you want to do you want to go with me on this thing? And the great thing about Kickstarter is that it pulls from
yes.
other media.
Yeah,
I mean, that's the thing. It's like, the guy who found a band that he likes is sitting on Kickstarter going, "Oh, what else can I back?"
exactly.
God, I have been looking at I mean, not even media. God, there was a Dutch oven that was
Mhm.
being sold, kitchen
Yeah,
crockery
yeah,
on Kickstarter, and I'm like, that looks really handy. I'm going to buy that thing. And I
yeah.
did.
Well, it's all
So,
it's all part of their business model. Is that it's Kickstarter. They want as many projects to succeed as possible, and so they will
100%.
do everything possible to keep you in the ecosystem.
Yep.
And so it's I've been thrilled with my experience at Kickstarter, and I feel like, look, I'm never going to leave the direct market. Like I've loved working with Aftershock. I've loved
Sure.
working with Action Lab. I've loved, like I and the publishers that I have been in talks with on other projects. I've really enjoyed working with them, but I'm never going to leave. Kickstarter will always be a part of my career moving forward for as
Of course.
long as the platform will have me, because I can tell you that, when we didn't have a publisher that was willing to sign the dotted line for the OZ, and we had publishers that we had been waiting for a long time to say, "Are you going to do this?" There were 1,254 people who said, "I believe in this. I believe in this enough that I will pay for it and I will wait for it to be sent in to the best of your abilities in the way you envisioned." And that is unique in the comics industry. It's
Well,
unprecedented.
and again, this is what's happening now in media. And Kevin Smith even said, you don't have to. It's narrowcasting.
Yeah.
It's finding a smaller group that is passionate about what you do and willing to support
Yes.
you. And
Yes.
and certainly the great thing in comics is it doesn't have to cost a lot of money. Like you
Yes.
said, you were looking for $6,000, you got $50,000. That's
Yeah.
fantastic. That's
Yeah.
great to hear.
It's
So
it's certainly it's certainly made up for losing a con season for sure.
I can
Um,
appreciate that, definitely, man. Well, again, tough times make creative
yeah.
people adapt, and
Exactly.
that's what you've done, David. So that's great. Let's wrap up if we
Yeah.
may. Is there anything else that you want to promote that's coming up?
Sure. Yeah. Well, you can. Anybody can find me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. I'm at Twitter and Instagram at Pepose D. It's my last name, first initial.
Right there on
Or
the screen, kids.
yep. David Pepose Comics on Facebook. You can also subscribe to my newsletter, Pep Talks, at bit.ly/pep news, or you can visit my brand new website, davidpepose.com. But yeah, otherwise, stay tuned. We will be sharing more news on this second installment of the OZ. It'll be hitting Kickstarter sometime in 2021.
Great.
Sooner rather than later. Scouts Honor, you can pre-order that at your local comic shop. The pre-order code, I believe, is NOV for November 200,994 for issue 1. You can also pre-order issue 2 right now, I believe. But yeah, 5-issue mini. If you tell your local comic shop to add it to your pull list. Post-apocalyptic Boy Scout cult. What could possibly go wrong? But otherwise, yeah, just if you subscribe to my newsletter or you follow me on social media, there will be plenty of cool new stuff coming in 2021 that I can't wait to share.
Attaboy. Well, keep it up, David. Nice going, and really, congrats. Scout's Honor. It looks terrific,
Thank
and
you.
the OC, great first issue, and No, keep it going, and it looks like you've got the wind at your back, and you understand. You've cracked the code.
Well,
So run, young man, run.
thank you so much, John. As always, it's a pleasure catching up, and let's do this again soon.
You got it, man. David Pepose, everybody. Thank you very much, David, and thank you for watching Word Balloon this week. We've got. It's funny. I've got two things tomorrow. Mike Grell is going to join us in the afternoon. That's going to be a lot of fun. He's got a new John Sable omnibus, and Mike represents that creator-owned world of the '80s when he was in the midst of doing books for DC. Was also creating great comics at First Comics. So that's going to be a great conversation. And the aforementioned Ed Brisson joining us about his Kickstarter. That's going to be happening Wednesday night. Thursday, it's To the Outer Limits, another episode review with me, Gabe Hardman. We'll see if Jeff Parker and Ian Brill and some of the others join us for a discussion of the next episode of the first season of The Outer Limits. And I will get back on the horse of Star Trek Discovery. I'm sorry that I didn't have a Thanksgiving episode between Black Friday and the other stuff going on. It was just too much. And so we'll have two episodes to talk about Thursday afternoon when we do our Star Trek Discovery review. Thanks a lot for watching tonight and participating. As always, stay